Right now, in your bathroom, there's a tube of paste sitting by the sink that you probably don't think twice about. You wake up, you grab a brush, you scrub for maybe 30 seconds if you're being honest, and you move on with your day. That habit feels modern, feels like something invented by a dentist in a lab coat sometime in the last century. It's not. Humans have been obsessing over their teeth for tens of thousands of years, long before soap, long before we understood what bacteria even were, long before most of the habits we consider basic hygiene existed at all. And here's the twist that makes this whole thing worth talking about. For most of human history, people barely brushed their teeth the way you do now, and their teeth were often in better shape than yours. So the question is, if they weren't doing what we do, what were they doing? And why did it work? Let's go back, way back. Long before toothbrushes, before toothpaste, before anyone had a word for dentist, early humans were already dealing with the same problem you deal with: food stuck between their teeth, plaque building up, breath that could probably clear a room. We know this because of something called dental calculus. That's the hardened plaque that builds up on teeth over a lifetime, and it doesn't wash away with time. It fossilizes. Which means when researchers dig up a skull that's 50,000 years old, they're not just looking at bone, they're looking at a chemical time capsule sealed onto the teeth. In 2017, a team analyzing Neanderthal remains from a cave in Spain found something wild embedded in that calculus: traces of poplar, a plant with natural pain-relieving compounds, plus evidence of a mold that produces something close to a natural antibiotic. Neanderthals weren't just eating food. There's a real chance they were self-medicating dental pain with plants, tens of thousands of years before anyone understood what medicine even was. Think about that. Before writing, before farming, before the wheel. Somebody with a toothache in a cave figured out that chewing a certain plant made it hurt less. That's not an accident. That's trial and error passed down until it became knowledge. But pain relief is one thing. What about actually cleaning your teeth? Here's where it gets even stranger. Skulls found across multiple ancient sites, Krapina in Croatia, sites in the Middle East, show tiny grooves worn into the sides of teeth, not from eating, from something being dragged across them over and over for years. Anthropologists believe these are toothpick grooves. Ancient humans were literally picking food out of their teeth with sticks, bones, even blades of grass, so consistently and for so many years that they wore permanent channels into the enamel. So the toothpick might be older than the wheel. Let that sink in. Now, humans weren't the only ones doing this either. Researchers studying chimpanzees and other primates in the wild have documented them using twigs and grass stems to clean debris from between their teeth. Which raises an uncomfortable but fascinating possibility. The impulse to dig something out of your teeth might predate humans entirely. It might be older than our species itself, a habit we inherited rather than invented. Now fast forward a bit. You get to ancient Egypt, and suddenly humans aren't just picking their teeth, they're inventing full-blown dental products. Around 3000 BCE, Egyptians were mixing up early toothpaste recipes, not exactly Colgate. We're talking crushed ox hooves, ash, burnt eggshells, and pumice, all ground into a paste and scrubbed onto teeth. There's even a version described in later Egyptian medical texts that used powdered mint, salt, pepper, and dried iris flower. That sounds less like hygiene and more like a punishment. But here's the thing, it worked. The abrasive texture scraped away plaque, and some of those ingredients had genuine antibacterial properties. Egyptians weren't guessing randomly. They were running an unintentional multi-thousand-year experiment in what actually killed bacteria, and they were writing down what worked. And it wasn't just their teeth they cared about. Egyptian texts, including the Ebers Papyrus from around 1550 BCE, describe remedies for loose teeth, gum disease, and even early attempts at stabilizing teeth with gold wire. Archaeologists have found Egyptian skulls with teeth literally bound together using thin gold thread, likely to keep a loose tooth in place. That's dental bridge work thousands of years before modern dentistry existed as a profession. Meanwhile, over in ancient China, people were developing their own solution entirely independently. Historical texts from around 1600 BCE describe chewing sticks made from twigs, frayed at one end into soft bristles. Some accounts even describe adding salt to the process, since salt has natural antibacterial properties. Completely different continent, completely different culture, and yet they landed on almost the exact same idea. Egyptians and later Middle Eastern cultures did something to physically scrub the teeth, paired with an ingredient that fights bacteria. That's the pattern worth noticing here. Nobody was sharing these ideas across oceans. There was no ancient dental conference. And yet, over and over, completely isolated civilizations arrived at strikingly similar answers. That's usually a sign you're looking at a real, urgent problem, one painful enough that humans everywhere were independently forced to solve it. But if you think ancient Egyptian dental paste was rough, wait until you hear what the Romans did. The ancient Romans, and later, famously, the Portuguese used something you would never guess: urine. Specifically, they used it as a mouthwash and even as a whitening agent for teeth. I know how that sounds, but there's actual chemistry behind it. Urine contains ammonia, and ammonia is a genuinely effective cleaning agent. It broke down plaque and helped strip stains off enamel. Romans imported Portuguese urine specifically because it was considered more potent, and there are historical accounts of it being taxed as a commodity. So somewhere out there, in ancient Rome, there was a booming urine import business built entirely around dental hygiene. Yeah, same reaction I had. The Romans didn't stop there, either. Wealthier Romans were known to have slaves brush their teeth for them using powders made from crushed bone and oyster shells, mixed with charcoal. Charcoal, interestingly enough, still shows up in toothpaste today, marketed as some kind of trendy new whitening ingredient. It's not new, it's about 2,000 years old. Here's what makes this whole story bigger than it sounds, though. This isn't just a list of gross ancient habits. It's evidence that dental care is one of the oldest continuous obsessions in human history, older than most religions, older than most languages that still exist today. Every culture, independently, arrived at the same basic conclusion: teeth matter, and they need maintenance. Which brings us to something that flips the whole story on its head. Ancient humans, especially hunter-gatherers, often had dramatically fewer cavities than we do now, even without brushes, without paste, without dentists. Researchers studying skeletal remains from later Stone Age populations in Sudan found something remarkable. Cavity rates in some of these ancient populations were a fraction of what we see in modern people, despite essentially zero formal dental hygiene by our standards. So how does that make sense? It comes down to diet, not toothbrushes. Hunter-gatherer diets were high in fiber, low in refined sugar, and full of foods that required serious chewing tough meat, roots, raw plants. That kind of chewing naturally scraped the teeth and stimulated the gums. And with almost no processed sugar in their systems, there simply wasn't enough fuel for the bacteria that cause decay to thrive. But here's the pivot, the but, that changes everything. Once humans started farming, teeth started falling apart. The agricultural revolution, starting around 10,000 years ago, introduced grains, starches, and eventually sugar into the human diet at a scale nature never intended. Skeletal records show a measurable spike in cavities and tooth loss right around the time farming spread. More carbs, softer food, more bacteria feeding on leftover starch in your mouth. Civilization gave us bread. Civilization also gave us cavities. And it kept getting worse. Fast forward to the sugar trade of the 1600s and 1700s, and dental decay exploded across Europe. Sugar went from a rare luxury to a daily staple almost overnight, and teeth simply weren't built to survive that shift. There's actually a darkly funny detail buried in this era. In the royal courts of Europe, particularly in England, having black, rotten teeth briefly became a status symbol. Sugar was so expensive that only the wealthy could afford to eat enough of it to ruin their teeth. Queen Elizabeth I was famously known for her blackened teeth, and reports from the time suggest some people who couldn't actually afford sugar would darken their own teeth artificially, just to look rich. Let that one sit for a second. People were faking cavities as a flex, which is exactly the environment that finally produced the toothbrush you recognize today. In 1780, a man named William Addis, sitting in an English prison, supposedly carved a handle from a bone and attached bristles from a brush to it, creating what's considered the first mass-produced style toothbrush. Not a monk, not a doctor. A prisoner with a bone and some free time. By the time he died, Addis had built an entire company around that idea, and his family kept manufacturing toothbrushes under his name well into the 1900s. But even before Addis, and even in cultures that never touched a modern brush, there was one method that quietly outperformed almost everything else: the chew stick. Across the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia, people used twigs from specific trees, most famously from the Salvadora persica plant, known as miswak. You'd chew the end until it frayed into natural bristles, then scrub your teeth with it directly. And it wasn't just mechanical scrubbing. That specific plant naturally contains antibacterial compounds. Modern studies have actually confirmed that miswak use can be as effective as a standard toothbrush at reducing plaque. People in some regions are still using it today, unchanged, for over 1,000 years. So here's the full picture. Neanderthals were self-medicating dental pain with plants tens of thousands of years ago. Ancient humans, and maybe even our primate ancestors before them, wore permanent grooves into their teeth from decades of toothpick use. Egyptians built abrasive pastes out of ash and crushed hooves, and even wired loose teeth shut with gold thread. Ancient China independently invented the chewing stick with salt as an antibacterial booster. Romans imported urine by the barrel to whiten their smiles and brushed with charcoal centuries before it became a trendy ingredient again. European royals let sugar rot their teeth into a symbol of wealth. And through all of it, the humans eating the roughest, most natural diets with the least hygiene by our standards often had the healthiest mouths of anyone in history. Then we invented farming, then sugar, then soda, and spent the next few thousand years trying to engineer our way back out of the problem we created. So next time you're standing at that sink, brushing on autopilot, remember you're not performing some modern invention. You're the latest link in a chain that stretches back to a Neanderthal chewing on poplar bark in a cave, trying to make a toothache stop. The tools changed. The ingredients definitely changed, thankfully, in at least one specific case. But the instinct that this matters, that it's worth the effort that's been with us since before we were even fully human. Maybe that's the real takeaway. We've always cared about the small things that let us survive a little more comfortably. Even something as simple as a clean mouth turns out to be one of the oldest threads connecting you to every human who ever lived. If you liked digging into this one, there's more of this kind of story on the channel. The small, strange, everyday things ancient humans figured out long before we gave them names.